Hello and welcome to Interact, our monthly session where we take up a certain hot topic and discuss it with you, our audience. Interact is brought to you by Reliance General Insurance and all of us at Autocar. And today we're going to be talking turbos or talking turbo petrols. This is really the new trend we are seeing where petrols are getting turbocharged and they're even getting democratized. Earlier, turbocharging, especially in petrol cars, was at the high end, but right now it's coming down even to mass market hatchbacks. So what is driving this trend and why are we seeing a proliferation of turbo petrols? Well, turbo petrols, it's really the new trend for many reasons. For one, it's a good way of meeting BS6 norms, tougher emission norms, and at the same time giving you performance and fuel efficiency. So all these conflicting requirements have to be met, and very often it's the turbo petrol which best meets that. And also what we've seen is that with the proliferation of SUVs in India, so many manufacturers, everyone's getting into SUVs. A turbo petrol suits SUVs better, especially when the diesel is on the decline. So in one way, a turbo petrol actually is a substitute, well, not quite, but it aims to be a substitute for turbo diesels that have gone, and we've seen a lot of manufacturers who've done this. Volkswagen, for one, they've gone completely out of diesel and they're trying to substitute with turbo petrol. Whether they can achieve that or not is something else which we can get into. Renault as well have done that. So Renault's fantastic K9K 1.5 turbo diesel is gone, and they've just introduced the 1.3 turbo petrol as well. So this is another reason why they're doing it. The other important reason why turbo petrols or small capacity turbo petrols are proliferating is because it's a good way to meet the small car norms where you have to have your engine under 1.5 liters to get certain tax benefits. Now, a naturally aspirated small capacity engine around 1.2 liters, which is the limit over there. Sorry, for petrols it's 1.2, for diesel it's 1.5. So for petrols, the 1.2 limit, if you do it with a naturally aspirated engine, you just don't get the power. So a good way to get the power and torque is by turbocharging a 1 liter or 1.2 liter, which a lot of manufacturers have done. Some companies have stuck to natural aspiration, notably being Hyundai and notably being Maruti and Honda as well, and even other manufacturers are also sticking with the 1.5 engine. So really it's each one is following their own path, but clearly turbo petrols, almost everyone, possibly with the exception of Maruti and Honda, have not gotten to it. Of course, Toyota is now using Maruti products, so they too are not there. But even Tata, Mahindra, which were not there earlier, they were not in petrol at all, they're jumping straight into the turbo petrol route. So these are the reasons why turbo petrols are gaining ground. A lot of questions people want to know: are they more fuel efficient? Are they more reliable? You know, what's the kind of power characteristics of them? Well, turbo petrols generally kind of increase driving pleasure. They theoretically also improve efficiency because they're very small capacity engines, but in the real world they're very, very sensitive to the way you drive, and fuel efficiency can completely collapse as a result. So a huge variation in fuel efficiency of a turbo petrol depending on the way you drive it. Reliability is something people are concerned about. Now, theoretically, turbo petrols, they have more complex parts, more moving parts. They are subject to much higher engine loads, especially within the cylinder area. So the pistons, the rings and all, they take a lot of load. The oil also too, has to really be of a very good spec. The turbocharger generates a lot of heat, so a lot more heat in a turbo petrol. So that puts a lot of stress on the engine. But are they reliable? Probably they are, because what manufacturers have to do, they have to spend a lot more money on giving it that threshold of reliability, which would typically last the life of the car. So these are some of the questions people have been asking, but overall turbo petrols are definitely here to stay. They are even proliferating. We've seen them going down into hatchbacks as well. So that is something which is a trend that is going to continue. But at the same time also, you've got companies like Maruti which say, hey, hang on, we want absolute affordability, absolute simplicity to be, let's say, the priority, and that it is for their customers. And it's for that reason they are sticking also with naturally aspirated engines. They want to take the simple route, not very exciting, but in terms of affordability, in terms of cost, natural aspiration also has its benefits. So with that, we are going to now take some questions, and we've got one. I'll just take this one from Dilip. Which is the best turbo petrol engine out there today and why? Well, Dilip, the best turbo petrol engine which I liked, but unfortunately it's gone, and we'll come to that in a bit, was the EcoSport's 1 liter EcoBoost engine, which actually won the Engine of the Year award for many years. In fact, I've been on the Engine of the Year jury and I had voted for it. It is an absolutely outstanding engine, amazing the kind of smoothness, the flat torque curve you get from just a 1 liter engine. It's really been the best 1 liter of the lot. But they've stopped making it, and for multiple reasons. One is it is a very, very expensive engine to make. Don't forget, when you downsize to that limit and then you have to boost power, you need a lot of expensive materials to kind of make sure that the engine functions reliably over its lifespan. The other issue which I'm coming to was fuel efficiency. So while theoretically the EcoBoost was very fuel efficient, when you drive it hard, fuel efficiency plummeted, and that really was something customers were not happy about. So that was a great engine. That's been my favorite turbo petrol so far, but sadly it's gone. And interestingly, it's going to be Mahindra which is going to be replacing it with a 1.2 three-cylinder engine for the next generation of the EcoSport. We've got Ajay Vishnu asking, just like turbo petrols, just like turbo diesels, do turbo petrols also have turbo lag? Does it affect low-end performance in city driving? Yes, of course. I mean, turbo petrols also have turbo lag, because that's the way it works. When you're at low RPM, clearly the turbo isn't spinning and you're relying on the cubic capacity of the engine. And obviously these engines have small cubic capacity, so they don't develop the torque. But I think there are technologies now. People are using smaller turbos, they're using calibration, the ECUs are very smart, and turbo lag is minimized. So it's really not so much of an issue, but I think compared to a naturally aspirated engine, you don't get that hair trigger response. You have to wait a bit, but it's not so bad. Manish is asking, what is the life of a turbo petrol engine in comparison to that of a naturally aspirated engine? Are there any long-term reliability issues with a turbo engine, and are they more expensive to maintain? Well, Manish, I think we answered this. Clearly, they are more complex, but I think, theoretically, the way manufacturers design them, they put a lot of, let's say, technology into it to make sure that in terms of reliability, they are okay. But theoretically, naturally aspirated engines are far simpler, less moving parts, less engine loads, and that in terms of reliability is easier to manage. Anand Chauhan, what are the pros and cons of a twin turbo engine? Well, I think that's going into a different realm altogether. Performance engines have twin turbos. Actually give you the best of both worlds, which is low end torque, where that's generally served by a very small turbo which spins very fast, but then it runs out of steam a bit, and that's why you need a bigger turbo which has more inertia. So to get it to spinning faster, it takes a lot of time. So if you just had a big turbo, you'd get turbo lag because the turbo would take a long time to spin. That's where you need a smaller turbo to get you to that stage, and then the bigger turbo takes over. So I think a twin turbo really gives you a much broader torque spread and makes and more power as well. Akhil wants to know how different are large capacity 4-cylinder naturally aspirated engines from smaller 3-cylinder turbo petrol engines in terms of refinement, performance, and drivability. Well, I think, we've got some classic examples. We've got 1 liter engines from Hyundai, Kia, Volkswagen, Skoda, there are two groups over there, and we've got, naturally aspirated engines like the 1.5 from Maruti and the 1.5 from Honda. Now, I think the 1.5 naturally aspirated Honda engine really is the benchmark. It's very responsive, very tractable, broad rev range. So it kind of gives you a more seamless power delivery. It's a bit more responsive, and clearly it's there for just for people who want a more kind of a relaxed driving experience. Clearly the turbo petrols have a much stronger mid-range punch. You get that little bit of oomph, which is great on the highway or when you're cruising. You don't need to shift down. If you're in the meat of the power band, just put your foot down and the turbo kicks in, and you get that lovely surge, which is what manufacturers are wanting to give with turbo petrols, because that's what diesels used to give. So again, as I said, in a way it's a bit of a they're trying to replace diesels with turbo petrols. Amarjeet's asking, which is a question a lot of people ask, do turbo petrol engines need to be warmed up before driving out and cooled off before shutting off? And does keeping the revs between 1500 to 2000 RPM help improve economy? Well, today's turbocharged engines, they are much more sophisticated. The lubrication system is much better, and typically, in usual conditions, which is a low speed, they don't run that hot. The reason why you had to really earlier let a turbo idle for a while is to just let it cool down, because the minute you switch it off, the oil circulation stops, the oil just gets burnt off, and then there's no lubrication at all, which can damage the bearings. But that, I think now the way the lubrication has developed, that's not so much of an issue. Vivian is asking me, a bi-turbo V8 or a naturally aspirated V8, which one would you prefer? Well, it depends. I mean, you've got some fantastic bi-turbo V8s, which I love, Mercedes, Audi, they make some great ones, and you've got some naturally aspirated V8s like the Mustang, which we have. So I'm just talking cars on Indian roads, so each one has their own character, but personally, I prefer naturally aspirated engines just because of the character they have. They sound better, they rev higher, and they're more responsive. Gautam is asking a very important question which we addressed, but let's get a little bit more into detail on this. Is why is it that turbo petrols are less fuel efficient compared to a naturally aspirated petrol when a turbo diesel is so efficient? Well, of course, a turbo diesel is much more efficient. We know that diesels inherently are more efficient, lower pumping losses, 25% better thermal efficiency. They run on very, very high compression ratios, so that helps. So, diesels by nature are very efficient. But between turbo petrols and naturally aspirated engines, so, turbo petrols on the driving cycle, they'll give you a very good figure. And that's really why a lot of manufacturers are kind of deploying them or using them, because they give you good emissions, they give you good fuel efficiency on the driving cycle. But the thing about a turbo petrol is that when you put your foot down, suddenly the loads increase in the cylinders. You've got a lot of boost coming in, and that causes a lot of heat buildup. So how do you compensate for that heat buildup? The only way you can compensate for that heat buildup is injecting more petrol into the cylinders, and that's where your fuel efficiency goes for a toss. The engine is running a little rich to kind of cool the engine down. Petrol, just cools the engine down, and that's where fuel efficiency goes for a toss. So just remember, turbo petrols, very sensitive to the way you drive. I mean, fuel efficiency varies wildly. They can be fantastically fuel efficient, drive them a bit of aggression, and that fuel efficiency falls off a cliff, just because of the way they function, in the way that petrol is actually used to cool the engine and protect it. It's a form of protection by putting a rich mixer into the engine. Rajesh has got a question. Is it true that turbo GDI engines emit more soot particles than diesels? Yes, GDI engines by design, just because of the way the fuel is injected directly into the cylinder, it does kind of generate particulate matter. And that's why with the new turbo GDI petrols going forward, you will have what you call gasoline particulate filters, GPFs. That is to catch and trap the particulates which a turbo GDI engine produces. So definitely over there. And again, everyone's been saying that diesel is the bad boy in particulates, but even in a gasoline direct injection, they even have ultra fine particulates which are smaller and even more difficult to catch. But really now you have technology and you have particulate traps which will catch hold of this. How sensitive are turbo petrol engines to fuel quality? I mean, they are particularly sensitive, especially to knock, and I think that's the issue in India. We were hopefully to get 95 octane when we went to BS6, but we didn't. We've stuck with 91 octane, and that's really, not optimize the way turbo petrols work. So clearly you'll see that when engines come from in international markets to India, there's always a slight down rating of power. It's because of the octane rating. And turbo petrols are pretty sensitive, and clearly, with 91 octane, sometimes they have to retard the ignition just so that there's no pre-ignition, which is something one has to guard against, because that could damage the engine. Paras is asking, why does a manufacturer like Honda still stick with naturally aspirated petrols? Will we see turbo petrols engine from them? Well, they have a turbo petrol. They have a 1 liter turbo petrol in the city, but sadly it's not coming to India. They're taking a different route. They will go naturally aspirated with a hybrid to kind of give you that extra boost. Now, every manufacturer has their own kind of engine strategy or philosophy. Honda traditionally been very, very strong in naturally aspirated engines. Don't forget, they've got millions of two-wheelers, they've got even lawnmowers, everything running with small displacement naturally aspirated engines. So really they're the masters of the small displacement internal combustion engine as far as natural aspiration goes. And we can see they've done a great job with the 1.5 IV Tech engine, and that's really their strength. Also, don't forget they've invested a lot in this engine to make it in India. So it doesn't make sense getting a turbo, because that would have a lot of imported content and it would be too expensive, and there'd be very few takers for it. So that's everyone has different strategies, whereas Volkswagen, for example, they are going to be producing or manufacturing the EA211 engine in India, which is the new family, and that is a turbo GDI petrol engine. We have got some more questions which we are taking. Niranjan wants to know, talking about Maruti, what is stopping Maruti from introducing turbo petrols? Why aren't they bringing in their 1.4 liter turbo petrol to India? Again, from Maruti's standpoint, they've invested a lot in their naturally aspirated range of engines. Also, their bore to stroke ratio of these engines don't lend themselves to turbocharging that easily. You need really long stroke engines, which is, if you see the new Mahindra Stallion family, they're all very long stroke engines, because that works best in terms of volumetric efficiency, all that with turbo petrols. And obviously there is Suzuki also has limited powertrains what they can offer. The 1.4 would be very expensive. They tried the 1 liter with the Baleno RS. Again, that didn't really work. So I think the problem for Maruti really is that their focus is on fuel efficiency and low cost and affordability, and in that respect the naturally aspirated engines serve them best. Though having said that, they are taking quite a hit in a loss of revenue, because they're paying a higher tax rate for cars like the Brezza, which is a sub 4 meter car, but it doesn't get the sub 1.2 liter petrol benefit. It's running a 1.5 liter. So clearly they don't have too many options, and I think from Maruti's standpoint, going turbo petrol is actually, I would say, quite a disadvantage while others are doing that. So I think Maruti needs to relook at its engine strategy also to offer both. They can stick with their 1.2 naturally aspirated like many other manufacturers have done, and also offer a turbo version, because honestly SUVs need that. SUVs need turbocharged engines for that mid-range kick. They are heavy vehicles. People expect them to have a certain amount of punch, and turbo petrol serve SUVs the best. Vignesh is asking again a very pertinent question. Do you think TGDI, or that's turbocharged gasoline direct injection engines, can replace diesels in our market? Well, I think honestly the feel over diesel, the economy over diesel is something which is very hard to replace. Diesels also deliver a lot more torque. They really have a solid kick. They do it very low down. In terms of range, in terms of cruising, they can be very long-legged. So diesels have a huge advantage, especially in big SUVs where the impact of fuel efficiency is felt much more. The delta between a big petrol SUV and a big diesel SUV. Obviously, you'll feel that a lot more in a diesel. I think there's a big lobby of people who don't have diesel saying petrol is the way to go. And clearly now when you see the way the fuel prices are going, it is stacked more in favor of petrol. But I don't think the diesel is going to go away because diesels are special. And it's quite interesting that, today people are looking at diesels more from an emotional point of view and petrols from a rational point of view. I mean, who would have thought that just 5 years back it was the other way around? Adarsh is asking me, which is the best gearbox for a turbo petrol engine? Quite frankly, I think an automatic gearbox is the best for a turbo petrol engine because when you're off boost, it kind of masks the turbo lag best. It doesn't leave it to the driver. And really between that 900 RPM to 1500 RPM range when you're moving in traffic, that's when you feel the turbo lag the most and you have to be in the right gear at the right time. And that's when an automatic does the job for you the best. So I think turbo petrols, you get the most out of them with an automatic transmission. Now there are multiple automatic transmissions. I personally am a torque converter fan more than a DCT because you've got that nice torque build-up and it all comes well together with a turbo engine and I think gives you a very seamless power delivery. Shankar's asking, are turbo petrols feasible for someone who drives 20,000 kilometers a year? Yeah, 20,000 kilometers a year is just about 1,800 kilometers a month. Well, I think that's it's fine for using. It depends on how important running cost is to you. Obviously, a diesel would give you much better returns in terms of cost savings. But turbo petrols are good enough. It depends again how you drive. If you drive it very hard, you'll be looking at big fat bills. And again, I want to reiterate that it is very sensitive to driving. You'll have some official figures in double digits, but when you drive them, they plummet to something like even 6-7 kilometers per liter for certain cars. So I think that's something you have to factor in mind. Suresh is asking which one is better in terms of highway driving and the fun factor, Hyundai Kia's TGDI or Volkswagen Skoda's TSI? Frankly, I think I think on TSI, on GDI technology, I think Volkswagen today is the benchmark. The way their engines perform, the way they kind of, the seamlessness, the smoothness, the power delivery, I find that they are the best of the lot. So in that sense, I think, it is, I would say that excuse me here, I've just lost the question. Yeah, I would say that between the two, I think the Volkswagen TSI is the better of the lot. Let's take a few more questions. We've got Shrikant asking Renault's 1.3 GDI or Hyundai's 1.4 GDI, which one is your pick? So I think, we've just driven the Renault in the Nissan Kicks and it is quite strong over there. But in terms of performance, quite frankly, the Hyundai 1.4 felt a bit stronger, though the power isn't as much and it felt a bit smoother. So I think it's just the application of how, in which product it is. Don't forget, the cars like the Kicks and all are also a bit heavier, so power to weight ratio is kind of impacted over there. Nitin Joshua is asking, will Volkswagen's 1.5 TSI engine be locally assembled for India 2.0? Yes, definitely. As I mentioned earlier, the 1.5 TSI belongs to the EA211 family of petrol engines, and within that you've got a 1-liter 3-cylinder engine, which we've already seen in cars like the Polo, the Vento, the Rapid, and it'll also come in the new SUV as the entry-level model. And with 1 cylinder attached to it, it becomes a 1.5 4-cylinder. So that's how the family is. It basically makes manufacturing it quite easy. On the same line, you can do 3-cylinder and 4-cylinder, and you've got enough volume between all these to kind of justify a manufacturing program. So definitely, it will be made over here. And so I think, let me see if I can get any more questions. Teranshu is asking, is it difficult to balance the vibration of a 3-cylinder turbo petrol engine, especially if it's a 1 liter turbo unit. So I think they've licked that problem now. I think you still get a bit of a thrum, but the modern 3-cylinder engines, honestly, for most people, won't have an issue with vibration. A lot of them use balancer shaft, very well balanced engines, and balancer shafts make a huge difference. So balancer shafts do sap a bit of power. So sometimes manufacturers, especially at the low end, don't use balancer shaft. It also saves costs and also it doesn't impact power and efficiency that much. But I think overall balancer shafts make a huge difference, and clearly that's a lot of manufacturers are using them to kind of smoothen out the inherent imbalance of a 3-cylinder engine. So 3-cylinder engines, they're inherently more imbalanced than a 4-cylinder engine. I've got Amit S asking, what is your opinion of Mahindra's M Stallion 2-liter turbo petrol engine in the new Thar? Honestly, I'm really impressed with that engine. I have to say, something you don't expect from Mahindra. They don't have a history of petrol engines, but they've done a great job. And I think what Mahindra have done very cleverly, what people don't realize that, it's all about calibration, because all engine manufacturers, especially in a BS6 era, especially petrol engine manufacturers, have to do this tightrope of balancing emissions. They have to meet very strict emissions, then they have to balance performance. You can't have a car that doesn't perform, doesn't have good drivability, consumers won't like it. But that also impacts fuel efficiency. So these all conflict, and balancing them out is the most difficult thing. But what Mahindra has done is, what they've said is, hey, look, we don't want to be the best in fuel efficiency, and they've prioritized performance. And when I drove the 2-liter in the M Stallion in the Thar, that's what I could feel. That responsiveness was immediate. There was none of that throttling of the engine you feel in some of the new BS6 cars. We've got that flat mid-range. You realize that fuel efficiency has been prioritized in the driving characteristics of the car. But in the M Stallion, it's all about performance, all about oomph, and all about that drive feel. So I think they've done a very good job there. I don't know what the fuel efficiency is yet. Obviously, it's the real world fuel efficiency. So I think that's something that remains to be seen. Pradeep is asking, for the Hyundai Aura or a similar size vehicle, is it better to go with an NA engine or a turbo petrol in terms of durability, efficiency and smoothness? So, to be honest, it really depends what you're looking at. I would imagine someone buying an Aura isn't really looking for that ultimate performance. For me, it's just a bit of an overindulgence having a 1-liter petrol in something like an Aura. I think a 1.2 will do you fine if you don't want the performance. It'll definitely be cheaper in the long run in terms of fuel costs. Also, buying it will be a lot cheaper. So I think, if you aren't a driving enthusiast, just normal driving, I would stick with the 1.2 naturally aspirated engine there. And let's take one last question. So let me see. Yeah, so we've got lots of questions there. We'll take this one from Rohit, which is the last question. It's interesting. Are turbocharged engines actually more expensive to manufacture? Are they more expensive simply because they are more powerful? No, they are more expensive to manufacture, and it's because they have to deliver a certain amount of power, but it's to factor in the reliability across the lifespan of the car. That makes it expensive actually. So it's not just the power, it's to develop the power reliably and safely, which is why it is expensive. And that's where, as I mentioned earlier, certain materials, certain technologies, they all are used in turbo petrols to compensate for the huge loads in the cylinder in the combustion process that turbo petrols develop. Yeah, so overall, I think a lot of interesting questions from you all. It is a new trend, turbo petrols. Obviously, this is the golden age of the turbo as we are seeing it, not just in India, but in globally, because turbos do serve a very specific need of managing the requirements, regulatory requirements of low emissions, low CO2 as well, because the smaller the engines, the less it emits. And of course, at the same time, not compromising too much on performance as well. So I think that's really trying to give you the best of every world, and that's the reason why a turbo petrol is we are seeing a kind of a new trend of it, a surge of turbo petrols, more and more manufacturers bringing it not just in expensive high performance or luxury cars, but even coming down to the mass market. That's what we are seeing, and I think that trend is going to continue. And with that, I'd like to say thanks everyone for tuning in. Lots of interesting questions. Glad you were there, and we'll be back next month for another session of Interact, brought to you by Reliance General Insurance and all of us at Autocar. So see you then, see you next month. Bye.